Now, before we get into tariffs, which is at the heart of Donald Trump's economic policy and strategy, let us listen to a chicken story, a chicken war basically. So what happened was that in the post-World War Germany, Germans, they started eating a lot of chicken, especially American chicken. So they started importing a lot from America, and it went to the tune of even 50 million US dollars. So as of 1962, they were importing close to $50 million worth of US chicken, which is currently, till today's time, it is $500 million, which is huge and massive. And this made European farmers very furious, because European farmers would want that Germany, they eat their chicken rather than importing it from US. So they got very furious. And one organization which later went on to become European Union, they thought of one strategy. What they did was they started imposing tariff on US chicken, which was exported by US to Germany. Now a 5-pound chicken, which started at just $1.6, now became $2.25 for Germans. And definitely the impact will be severe, and the impact will be outright. The Germans, they started slowly and slowly consuming less of American chicken, and they started consuming more of German chicken or the European chicken. So the imports of American chicken from US, it dropped very quickly. And US chicken farmers and producers and politicians as well, they became very furious. And they thought that Germany is definitely a very big market for chicken. And if they are able to hurt Germans in one way or the other, it might make Germans, or it might make Germany change their stance and change their policy. So what US did was, in retaliation to this tariff, US also put a 25% tariff on the imported trucks on their country. Now, who was importing a lot of trucks to US? Germany, that is Volkswagen. So now this strategy worked. The sale of German trucks in US, they fell by nearly half, and they never really recovered. So meanwhile, what happened was that Germans, they were paying more for their chickens, and on the other hand, US now had fewer truck options. Now, it's a kind of a perfect and classic example of what tariffs can do and why several economists, they oppose tariffs. See, one thing which is very clear in this example is that tariffs, they hurt consumers while protecting very specific niche industries. Also, tariffs are an attempt to make countries change their mind and change their behavior. While tariffs has not been a very important part of US economy since the last many decades, but now there has been a reversal, because Donald J. Trump, becoming the 47th president of US, has been advocating for increasing the percentage of tariffs on imported goods to its countries. Now, Donald Trump has said or remarked in one of his speeches that some say that this tariff policy is a form of economic nationalism, but he says that it is common sense. He also says that I call it common sense and I call it America first. So now this policy of Donald Trump has brought a lot of people to think that tariffs in a way are useful for America's economic arsenal and America's economic policy in a way which hasn't been used before. And which is why a discussion on tariffs is quintessential and important from economic point of view, that what is the impact of tariff. And because of this, from economic standpoint, it is very imperative for us to understand that what is the real impact of tariffs, what are tariffs at the first place, what are its impacts, positives and negatives, and on whom these impacts will be clearly seen, and eventually at the end of the day, who benefits from tariff, and what happens to the global trade because of tariff. All these questions we'll be trying to understand today. So hello, my name is Preetpal Singh, and all of you are watching Perspective. Okay, so first let's understand how tariff really works. Now for that we have to take example of 2018, when Donald J. Trump, he imposed tariff on the washing machines which will be imported to US from any other country. Now the motive of imposition of tariff on washing machine by Donald Trump was to increase the number of jobs and to benefit the consumers of US. Now since then, whenever a washing machine is imported to US, the company on the US side who's doing this import has to pay a tariff to the US government, and also the margins are very, very low. See, the tariffs these companies have to pay, but eventually who's bearing the brunt of these tariffs? Ultimately the consumer, because these companies, they pass on the price to the consumers by adding that tariff into the price of the overall commodity. So if there is 25% tariff on washing machines, the price of the washing machine might be up for the consumer by 25 or 30%, because the producers or the distributors won't pay tariff from their own pocket. They will take it from the consumers and then they will pay to the government. So basically that is the whole point in some sense, that when a tariff is imposed, the motive is to reduce the demand for those goods and to create a space for domestic producers. to reduce the demand of imported goods and create a space which can be filled by the domestic producers, and domestic producers can take the place of those importers. That after these tariffs, not only the prices of imported washing machines went up, but the prices of the domestically manufactured washing machines, they also went high. Now you have to understand it very clearly that it is a myth that if we impose more tax on imports, the prices of the imported goods would increase, but the domestic producers, they won't change the price. This is a myth. Because domestic producers, if they see that the imported goods are now expensive, why should I sell my product at a lesser price? So domestic producers are also induced and motivated to increase their prices. This is what happens in a market-driven economy. See, because it is simple demand and supply. If the price of imported good goes up, the domestic manufacturers, domestic producers, they fill up the space. And domestic producers' goods demand will rise. If their goods demand is going to rise, definitely they are going to anticipate it and increase their prices. So in a way, what is being done is that since we are imposing tariffs on imports, what is happening is the overall price domestically and of the imported good also, the overall price of that good is going up, booming up, which is leading to what? Inflation, and which is impacting whom? The middle class of the society. And the same happened in US in 2018. And it wasn't just for the washers or the washing machines. The prices of the dryers also went up, even though they were not related to the tariffs. Because usually it's the case that whenever a person buys a washer, they also buy a dryer as well. So even though dryers weren't directly affected by the tariffs, but indirectly they were affected by the shift in demand of the washers. So there was an increase in demand of the domestic washers because of that increase in price of washers, and because dryers are complementary to washers and they are complementary goods, the prices of the dryers also goes up. But the question is it also bad? The answer is no. And the real thing is that this increase in tariff, it definitely brought a lot of jobs to our country. So now the question is everything bad with the tariffs? The answer is no. Everything is not bad. These tariffs, they did create a lot of jobs in US. And the study says that this tariff, it led to 1,800 more jobs being created in US. And this was by the companies like Samsung, LG, who were opening up their plants in US now. And the study found that US collected around $82 million annually from these tariffs. So $82 million annually from these tariffs, 1,800 jobs made or jobs created. But because of the increase in price, the cost to the consumer was close to $1.5 billion more. So basically, it would be right for us to say that for creating each job, US actually paid $8,15,000 per job. So $815,000 were paid to create one job by US if we do all the mathematics over here. Now this seems quite an expensive job creation program for the US, not a very cheap one. And so, this makes my point that is one more reason why several economists in the entire world, they don't like tariffs at all. See, many experts say that there are much other cost-effective ways, much other cost-effective measures, more effective measures to create or increase employment in those industries, rather than putting tariffs and boosting domestic production and then creating jobs. Because ultimately, the brunt is borne by the consumer. And these weren't the only tariffs which were created in the 2018 year. Donald Trump also levied tariffs on steel, on aluminum, and these were designed basically to punish China for its transgressions of international trade rules. So they were in retaliation and on a reciprocal basis, vis-a-vis if we compare it to China. Now, there is a security related dimension to it as well. Now, for our national security, steel and aluminum and iron ore, they are used to make a lot of military equipments and also everyday things like cars, equipments, machines, and also all the industries that use steel. Now they have to pay a higher price, which squeezes their margins. So which is why these tariffs, they negatively impacted these industries also, the domestic industries as well. And also it put them at a competitive disadvantage against the foreign producers of those same goods, which don't have to pay those taxes or don't have to pay those tariffs. And as studies have shown, that the jobs which tariffs are able to gain in the upstream industry or upstream process are way fewer than the jobs which are lost in the downstream process of the industrial and manufacturing sector because of tariffs. So this is one fact which we need to look at. So many of these 2018 tariffs which were levied, they had their own pros and cons. In many of the cases, they inflated the prices of the inputs in our country, inflated the price of the goods and services consumed by the consumers of US. So in a way, negatives and cons were there, but there were pros also, that it created several jobs in the country as well. It gave employment to a lot of people. Domestic producer, they got an impetus, and many companies who were earlier there in China, they started leaving China and going and settling in other countries like that of India to create more resilient supply chain networks. But the question is, did it change the behavior of China? The answer is no. In fact, as a matter of fact, China became even more aggressive with its trade policy. But here's a very important thing. Even after all the criticisms, a review by the Joe Biden's administration on these tariffs imposed by Donald Trump, this review stated that these tariffs should remain in place and they should stay, and the administration should add or increase them rather than reducing them, and which they already did. And see, one more thing which we need to understand here is that once tariffs are in place, they are there to stay. Because there are two factors which make sure that tariffs, once they are there, they stay for long enough. The first factor is that there are a lot of interest groups which are formed. So because imposition of tariffs, it increases the market share of the domestic producers. Now, domestic producers, if their market share has increased, a lot of interest groups are formed. And then if you want to lower the tariffs, they will protest. And they won't, the interest groups, domestic producers interest groups, they won't like it. So they won't allow, or they won't want the government to change the tariffs now. Or they would want the government to impose more tariffs, but not to cut the tariffs. So that is one reason, which is why tariffs, if implemented, they stay in place for very long. And the second reason is tariffs being treated as a bargaining chip. So the real rationale and the reasoning is that why should we unilaterally do away with the tariffs? Even if there are economic benefits, but what if the other country doesn't reciprocate? And why should we unilaterally go away with the tariffs? Because this can be used in negotiations later on. In certain negotiations, if other country is not allowing, in different negotiations, if other country is not agreeing to some conditions, we can always say that we will reduce the tariffs imposed on your products if you do so and so, which is told by us. So tariffs, in a way, over a period of time, they start working as a bargaining tool, a negotiation tool, and a bargaining chip as well. So to say, one thing is clear, that tariffs are really hard to remove. So basically 60 years later, 25% tariffs on trucks are still there. And even though US chicken farmers, they don't really care of selling to European market now, but if we see this properly and with a bird's eye point of view, we are still living in the legacy of that chicken war. And still, that chicken war is ongoing. It has manifested and changed its form multiple times and changed its way multiple times, but it is still prevalent. And there are a lot of lessons from the history which we can take from this. And one such lesson is that whenever a country is imposing a tariff, that tariff should be well thought of and it should be strategically put, because the countries might feel that they are doing it for the short-term strategic purpose. But the thing which they fail to anticipate is that these tariffs are going to stay on for decades and decades to come. They are not going to go away in the future. And you are just helping out a particular industry temporarily. But in the long run, competitive advantage is what will make the industry prosper, and not these tariffs. So now let's come to Donald Trump's policy on tariffs. See, Donald Trump's plan is to impose a 60% tariff on every product which comes from China, and also 10% or even 20% tariff on every importer from every other country. And Donald Trump says that countries are going to pay us back. Finally, after 75 years, they are going to pay us back for whatever we have done for the world. And multiple independent studies have happened to see and show the impact of this increase in tariffs. And many studies, they say that these tariffs, drastic tariffs, it might increase the average expenditure of US household by $1,700 a month. And another study found that it could cost more than 680,000 jobs in US. And one thing which we need to factor in is the impact on the US exports also. See, because if US is imposing tariff on the imports to their country, other countries in retaliation would be putting a tariff on US exports also. So US exports might also diminish, and this also might be a very problematic situation for the exporters in the country of US. Or exporters might also face the brunt of the entire world, especially of China and different other developing nations. See, but the logical question which you might ask is that if tariffs are so harmful, then why Donald Trump is going on to increase the tariffs? See, the reasons are simple. In the last 20 years, China as a country has developed into a manufacturing powerhouse. They have invested in manufacturing sector like no other country has invested, and which is why they have a competitive advantage and a cost advantage in creation or manufacturing of certain goods like iron, steel, aluminum, and different other metals and different other goods as well, which is why they're able to sell those products and goods at a below market price in the entire world. and plus numerous other trade related violations which China has done, like illegal dumping of their goods and artificial depreciation and devaluation of their currency. All these things done by China have basically allowed President Donald Trump to again renegotiate and restart the discussion on imposition of tariffs on Chinese products. And while he's including Chinese products, he's including his reciprocal and common sense policy with other developing nations as well. And basically, we saw that the Biden administration, which came after the Trump administration, they continued this stance. And when now Donald J. Trump is again in power, he will again continue this stance even further. See, all these things are going to take a very dramatic turn in the future. In current times, in short time, China and US both will retaliate. If US imposes a 60% tariff, China will impose a 60% tariff or 50% tariff. If China retaliates, US will even increase the tariffs even more. Many times it can go upwards of 100% as well. So this retaliation, where will it stop? We do not know. But is the world again foreseeing a trade war? That is the real question which we need to ask. That should or would a trade war start after this retaliation to and fro between the countries? Short-run impacts are negative, that is for sure. In long run, what really happens, we do not know. As the quote says, that in long run, we all are dead. But still, that chicken war analogy which we saw, it should continue to guide us and tell us, as different other developing nations as well, it should tell us that what can be the real impact of tariffs on a country's economy, on a country's stability. So now we understood the whole US and China scenario, and US imposing a lot of tariffs on BRICS countries as well, where India is also a very prominent part. Now, one thing academically we need to understand is that why a country imposes tariffs. Now, one reason is what US is doing with China, but there are different other economic reasons to it as well. Because see, one thing is there, India has also imposed a lot of tariffs against the goods which are coming from China. So it is not that what US is doing is bad or is economically not viable. But India is also in the same step, in the same shoe, where India has been increasing the tariffs on Chinese imported goods. So if the negative impact is there on the US economy, wouldn't there be a negative impact on the Indian economy? That is the question which we might ask. But before that, academically, we need to understand economically what are the reasons why a country imposes a tariff. Now, you already know that tariff is a tax imposed on imported goods. So if a good is coming to my country, let's say this watch is coming to India from China for 500 rupees. Now, India decides that every watch which comes from China to India, that watch, 100 rupees tariff will be levied on each watch. So earlier the watch before tariff, it was coming for 500 rupees. Now the same watch, because of imposition of tariff, is coming at 600 rupees in my country. So definitely the price of the watch in the country, in my home country in India, it will go up. And this 100 rupees is the tariff, which is the tax on imports. Now, why this is imposed, we need to understand. One reason which we saw from the chicken war and the US example is to protect the domestic industries. See this watch example, if tariff is imposed on this watch, and this watch becomes more expensive than before, imported watch becomes more expensive than before, then I as a citizen, I as a person living in India would want to go for cheaper alternatives. So if a domestic producer is selling me a watch for 550 rupees, and the imported watches of 600 rupees, I will go for the watch of the domestic producer. So, in order to protect a domestic producer, increase the market share of domestic producers, these tariffs, they are useful. That is first part. And second part is it increases government's revenue. Now, if these tariffs are imposed, who is collecting this tariff? The government. So it is a revenue stream for whom? The government. And government uses these tariffs money in order to create jobs in the country, provide social security benefits to the people, and other social welfare programs and initiatives that the government has launched. So that is the second reason. And third reason is that in some cases, tariffs might increase foreign direct investment. So let's say if we impose a tariff on a company producing these watches in China, when this watch comes to India, it becomes 600 rupees. 100 rupees tariff. Earlier it was 500 rupees, now it becomes 600 rupees. Now, what if this company who's manufacturing this watch from China, they open their base in India? They open their manufacturing plant in India. Then they will be able to sell these watches at 500 rupees only, or even lower the cost. Which is why sometimes if we levy tariffs on some countries, companies in those countries, they are induced to come to the domestic country, to come to the other country and set up their industries and bases. So what will happen if a country imposes a tariff? In the domestic production circle, FDIs might flow into that country. So FDIs might increase. Because of these three prominent rationales, and also for negotiation tactic and different other reasons which we saw before, because of these reasons, tariffs are imposed by the countries. See, but one economic strategy is there. On the country on whom the tariffs are imposed, they go for certain strategies to avoid those tariffs. First is dumping. that is putting or exporting a large volume, massive volume of products at one time altogether. So with this, what really happens is that per unit tariff, it gets decreased. So dumping is one thing which China has been doing with India. Now, second is logically passing the tariff on to the consumers. That is second thing, very simple thing. And third is setting up the factory in the home country itself, in the other country itself. So if we as India, we are putting tariffs on China, Chinese industries or Chinese companies, they'll set up their base in India. With that, we won't be able to ask from them the tariffs. So that is the third thing which can happen or which countries do to avoid the tariffs. And one very prominent thing which they also do is trade rerouting. So let's say we have a free trade agreement with France, but we don't have a FTA with China, and on China we are putting a lot of tariffs. So China, what they will do, China, they will, rather than exporting their products to India directly, they will export their products to France first. And from France, they will come to India tariff free, because we are not going to take tariffs from any products which comes to India from France, because we have a FTA with France, let's say. So in that case, this tariff can be avoided by China through trade rerouting. But this has been stopped now, or this has been considerably reduced now, because now the requirement is that any good which comes to our country, the place of origin of that product should be mentioned, so that we can levy tariffs properly and precisely. Now, coming back to this Donald Trump's tariffs policy and strategy, see, the unpredictability in this regime is definitely there. And economists from all quarters and different quarters of the world, they are discussing about this impact of Donald Trump's tariff on the whole global trade also, and what will be its impact in the entire multilateral institutional setup also. Because WTO, World Trade Organization, it mandates that there should be free flow of goods and services in the entire world. Free trade should be there. But if tariffs are imposed, definitely it is a threat to free trade. It is a threat to the globalization, which we saw in India in 1991 and in the whole world in 1980s and 1990s. So this protectionism tendencies, it should go away and should not be done, not just by the one country, that is US, but other countries as well. So because other countries, if they show bad attitude or if they show biases towards US products, US is bound to retaliate. And US will definitely put America first, American citizens first, and they will have the tendency to make America great again. So we can't question that. It is the right of US citizens, the birthright of the US citizens, that first they need to be catered to by the US government. Then the US government will look towards the global trade or the global policies and altogether other things. But first, the priority of the US government should be Americans, definitely, as the priority of every government should be first their own citizens, then the entire world. But this protectionist tendency should go away unanimously. Also, this globalization needs to be promoted, and a globalized world order needs to be established. And in all of this, the aim should be to enhance the global trade, to make it go higher, and the role of World Trade Organization in these negotiations is paramount. But in WTO as well, what is required? Reforms. So what is really the need of the hour? The need of the hour is to shift from protectionist tendency towards globalistic tendencies. And what is in store with respect to the trade war between US and China? Will there be a trade war? Will China retaliate? And what will happen? What will be the consequences on India and the other developing nations? It is for us to see in the future. I hope you gained a new perspective from this session. Do let me know what are your views regarding this imposition of tariff, and are you in favor of tariffs or not? I'll be very happy to read your comments, and please have a very fruitful discussion. All the very best and have a beautiful day. Thank you.